Hi, I'm Bill Allan, and I have been doing video for a really long time. Since I was about 10 years old, I started helping out my brother with video stuff, and I majored in film and video in college, and I worked professionally in the film industry for a few years in Chicago, and then I worked in television for a few more years in Chicago until I decided to go back to school and become an English teacher. And then lo and behold, I lucked out and I got a job as an English teacher teaching media at a high school. So that's what I've been doing for the last 11 years. Our high school is very fortunate to have a phenomenal facility and great equipment. So I'm here to answer questions. And since we don't have the live Google Hangout thing going so well, we're going to just delve right into some different categories. So right now we are, actually let's go over here, Chris. So we could start off with some post-production tips. A lot of the folks here like to understand a little more. I'm moving closer to my camera, buddy. A lot of the folks here want to understand more about post-production. So I have a show here that we do that I brought up on the screen. We're going to go full screen, Dave. Go ahead and do that. So this is Adobe Premiere. It's in a nutshell. Here's a preview window, so you can click a clip, bring it up in preview. You could set ins and outs depending on what you want. This highlighted area from there to there is already set as an in and out. That's one section of the show. So this down here is your sequence window. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see. So there's one section of the show. There's a break in the middle, this little chunk in the middle. There's a little break. That's a little bump. And then the second section of the show comes up here, and then the end credits are there, okay? So one of the biggest things that I see beginning video people having a challenge with is managing the mix on their sound, their levels. Is that something that would be of interest to you? Let's assume that it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in to the front end of this sequence, okay? And what we have is a title scene and then an intro sequence, okay? Now, what we see here, as I'm playing this intro sequence, there's music, okay? So I'm actually going to turn the volume down because the volume doesn't matter, and you'll understand what I mean in a second. When we're playing this intro music right here, two things to look at. Number one is your waveforms, that area right there, okay? Your waveforms will kind of give you an indicator of your sound levels, but the biggest thing is over on the bottom right corner, which is your VU meter. VU stands for volume unit. And you'll see that it tops out at 0 and then it goes down to negative numbers, okay? So my golden rule is that you have different ranges that are appropriate for your mix, depending on what you're putting in, okay? People talking, so your primary dialogue, or if you're doing a voiceover for your video, your voiceover, those levels should be between -6 at the highest and -12. That range is the sweet spot for voiceovers and talking. So I'm going to go ahead and cut to a shot where the host is talking here. And you'll see that typically his voice is falling into this range, the -6 to -12 range, okay? That's not on accident. That's because we set the levels appropriately. Now, what if it's not? I'm going to go ahead and just falsely adjust this. I go right click on that. I can go to audio gain and I could boost it up. I'm going to go up to 20, okay? Which is just stupid loud. The reason why I want to show you what happens when you go to 20, that's taking too long. I'm going to cut this clip just for the hell of it, make it shorter, and then I'm going to do audio gain 12, okay? I'm boosting it up to 12. Immediately you see these down here, your waveforms, they blow up, right? But more frighteningly, when I play this clip, you're going to see over here on the VU meter, you're going to see it blow up, right? So now it's going up into the red. That's peaking. It creates overmodulation. We don't hear it right now, but what would happen is basically that it would be overmodulated. It's going to be too loud, and it'll get crunchy. It'll peak. It'll distort, okay? So you never want that to happen. So if I play this and it is overmodulated, I'm going to right click and just do basic math. So if it was at 0 and I want it to be down, I'm going to bring it down, -12. Okay? So now I know that it'll get closer to that sweet spot of -6 to -12 in the VU meter. There's that -6 to -12 range. So my primary dialogue or a voiceover is that range, -6 to -12. Some of you guys, cut back to my camera. Some of you guys like to add sound effects maybe. Sound effects are underneath. So here's your primary dialogue at -6 to -12. A sound effect should be lower than that, from like -12 to -18. Or maybe even lower, -15 to -18 or -21, that range. A sound effect should never be louder than your primary dialogue. Even if you want it to startle someone, like a gunshot or something, or an explosion sound, it should never blow out your VU meter. It should never go higher than your primary audio. Your last level of audio is your music bed, okay? So if you're talking and you want to have music playing underneath you, that's why they call it a music bed, because everything else sleeps on top of it. A music bed is down between -18 and -24 typically, sometimes even lower. I also recommend never using music beds that have vocals, because the vocals, the words, the lyrics, can be distracting from your audience being able to hear what you're saying. So try to find instrumentals for your music beds. The last category is your music that's primary music. So for example, many of you content creators have an opening sequence with some music, right? Cody's got this cool little jingle that pops up with his logo. Those levels should never exceed -12, okay? They should not go up to -6. They're in that -12 range, okay? If you want to cheat it a little bit, maybe -9, but really it should never go above -12, okay? And here's why. If you've ever watched YouTube videos, you could watch 20 different YouTube videos from different content creators, and you'll find yourself constantly adjusting the volume on your computer or your headphones or whatever you're listening to. The reason for that is because no one uses the rules that I just told you about, but they're very simple rules. If you have software that has a VU meter in it, you can use these, lickety split. And if you use them, I promise you that consistently your audio will be more balanced and have a better, cleaner mix. Whether you're listening, whether your audience is listening through headphones or off of a computer speaker, or if they've got a big Bose sound system, doesn't matter. I watch videos on my TV, I watch them on the computer, I watch them with headphones on, and using my mix range, the -6 to -12, -12 to -18, and the -18 to -24 ranges, you're guaranteed to have more consistent sound. Okay, so that's how you do it. The VU meter never lies. Trust the VU meter, not your ears. People adjust volume all the time. That's not an accurate measure of sound levels. Okay, let's see. Exporting in the right format. Okay, great opportunity here to take a look at this. So let's go back to the screen capture, Dave. So let's say you're using Adobe Premiere or the Adobe Creative Cloud, which I strongly encourage. What you need to do is figure out what you're going to do for your export settings. So let's click on our sequence. We're going to go up to File and Export. Okay. So here's what we have in Adobe Premiere or the Creative Cloud is very similar. You choose Format. Okay. Now there's a bunch of presets. Okay. I'm going to recommend for YouTube one of two options: either QuickTime or the with the .mov wrapper, or you choose H.264, which will give you an MP4 wrapper. Okay, those are your best two options right now, in most cases for web streaming, for uploading a file to YouTube, or frankly to Facebook. MP4 with an H.264 video codec and an AAC audio codec. So let's explain what that looks like. Let's take a look. So how do I export from Premiere? I'm going to click on this output name first, because that's telling it, hey, where do I want to put this? If I don't tell it where, it's just going to by default go to whatever project I last exported, which is not smart. So I'm going to go to the inside corner, I'm going to go to this one, and I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to call it Finished. This is just my workflow. Managing your media is something that's really important. If you do all your stuff and you put it on the desktop, that's bad. We'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to make a Finished folder, and I'm going to title it up here, the name of the program, the date, any other relevant information that I want in the title. I chose H.264, so it's going to show you my source and my output. Here's my output. There's the name of the file, .mp4. But down here are the specs. So if you look at the video tab, it tells you your basic video settings. Okay, so this is your pixel aspect ratio, 1920 by 1080. Then your frame rate, right? 30 frames a second is pretty standard. Aspect ratio, if you're doing a progressive field order, is square pixels. TV standard is NTSC. If you're in Europe, you may choose PAL and your settings will be different. European export settings are going to be different. Your frame rate's going to be different depending on your cameras, but it'll probably be either 25 or 50 if you're in Europe using the PAL system. If you're in the States, you're definitely using this 2997, aka 30, or if you're shooting in 60 frames a second, you might use this 5994. Okay, so then we go down to bitrate settings. Okay, now here's the thing with bitrate. Let me talk to you directly. A lot of people think, man, I want my video to look great, I'll just jack up the bitrate. Well, the bitrate can only go so high, and there's really only a certain point to which you should jack up your bitrate, because if your original source footage doesn't have a high bitrate, there's no point in doubling or tripling your bitrate on the export. In other words, you can't take a turd and polish it and make it into a diamond. So when we talk about bitrate, you have to think about what your original source material bitrate was. Okay. Now, when we shot this show, we were using pretty professional cameras, camcorders. And we were recording in Apple ProRes 422, which is higher quality video format anyway. So I could bump the bitrate up here to 7, but I want you to watch down here on the screen capture. You'll see that the size right now, it's 1253 megabytes, so it's just 1.2 gigs basically. If I jump this target rate up to 7, okay, notice how now it's up to 1900 megabytes, almost 2 gigs. Let's say I jump it up to 9, okay? So that file size is going to keep going up because I've raised the bit rate, okay? But again, there's no point to jacking your target bit rate up any higher than what the original source bit rate is, because most human eyes on a YouTube video are not going to differentiate between 7 and 9 or 7 and 10 for your bit rate. Let me look over here for the questions.
Let's say we're shooting talking heads.
Like many channels, shoot in 60 or 30, export in 30 or 60. Okay, so that's a question of frame rate. Let's talk about that for a second. I'll finish up this note. Basically, once you get all your settings, you want to double check audio. See how that says audio format AAC? So your audio encoding codec is AAC, your video is H.264. Okay, whether you choose MP4 or .mov doesn't really matter. Your video codec is H.264, your audio is AAC, okay? So, let's address the next question about frame rate. So, 30 or 60. Again, this goes back to your camera. So, if you have a camera and you are shooting in 60 frames a second, you probably want your source, your sequence to be in 60 to match that, okay? If you're shooting in 30 and exporting in 30, that's fine too. Neither of one of those things inherently should affect the size of your end product. And it's also, it's not necessarily affecting the video quality. Okay, here's where frame rate comes in. A 60 frames per second video is going to look a little more crisp. In other words, there's going to be a little less motion blur. You see 60 frames per second typically when you're watching something like sports, okay? Because they want that crisp action. If you're not moving, if you're talking to a webcam or to a camera, you're doing talking heads vlogs, or even like crafting videos, there's really no need to be shooting at 60 frames a second, unless you just like that look. Otherwise, 30 frames a second is just fine. That's really all it comes down to. If you're doing slow motion for some reason, then maybe 60 frames a second makes sense, okay? Or even higher frame rates. Some cameras that people have can shoot 120 frames a second. But again, that's if you plan on recording something and then slowing it down in post and you want really crisp slow motion that doesn't have motion blur. I think that kind of addresses the 60 or 30 question. Again, exporting, you're just going to export in whatever your source is. So if you shot in 60, then your sequence should also be in 60. and your export should be in 60. A lot of people just do whatever their camera shoots in, right? So you go and you buy an affordable camcorder, and the preset for that camcorder is 60 frames a second, so that's what they shoot all their videos in. My guess is there's a menu function in that camera that would have 30 frames a second as an option.
30 versus 29.
Okay, so 30 versus 29.97, same thing. There's the way that works out is basically progressive, and then 29.97 is actually like television 30 frames a second. Okay, so 99.9% of anybody on the planet isn't going to see 3/100ths of a second worth of difference between 29.97 and 30 frames a second. Isn't going to make a difference to everybody on the planet. And really, same thing with 59.94 versus 60. So if you have a camera that shoots in true 60 frames a second, then make your sequence match that. The idea is whatever your source camera footage is, match that on your sequence in post, and then match that on your export, okay? Where you get into trouble is when you change your sequence settings from your source stuff, or your export is different. That's where you could get a funky looking video, because if you do progressive to interlaced, or interlaced and you try to make an interlaced video progressive, that's where you get into trouble. So to keep it easy, just keep your source and your sequence when you're editing and your export all the same frame rate, and you can't go wrong. As far as YouTube video quality, it's not going to make a difference. YouTube is compressed video anyway. H.264 is a video compression codec. And H.265 will be coming out soon, and it'll have a lot less compression, but it's ultimately the same thing. You're making video for the web. And again, for the web, your video quality, if you do 30 frames a second, true 30 frames a second progressive versus 29.97, it's not going to make a difference. Hey, welcome, WasD20. Should people be shooting on their phones? Mine does 4K, or should they grab a camcorder, or should they just save up for a DSLR or mirrorless? Okay, so here's where my thoughts are on that. I shoot a lot of my videos at home, a lot of my crafting videos with my phone, because it also can shoot 4K. It's a compressed 4K. So I'll tell you this, 4K versus 1080 has less to do with the size, right? Here's 1920 by 1080, and then there's 4K, which is a lot bigger, right? More pixels. But what I could shoot in 1920 by 1080 with a camera versus somebody's 4K phone camera, there are going to be some big differences. And it's less about pixel aspect ratio. It's less about resolution and more about other factors that give you control, okay? For some of you guys, shooting with your phone is absolutely no problem if you have good light and you have good sound. That's the biggest factor, okay? So I'll give you an example. If you take your phone that shoots in 4K and you go around your house with just regular house lights on and you shoot footage, it might not look too bad. When you go out on a nice sunny day with your phone and you shoot nice sunny day footage with your phone, it's going to look amazing, right? It'll look fantastic. Why? Same phone, more light. Okay, the sun provides you more light, so that camera's little baby sensor is able to soak up more information. Okay, a better camera, whether it's a camcorder or a prosumer camcorder or a DSLR, has a bigger sensor in it. Okay, it's got a bigger sensor. So that camcorder, like I have DSLRs that can't shoot 4K, but if I slap a lens on them and I give them enough light, they'll shoot a much cooler image than your 4K phone. Okay, so it's less about the size of the K, right? It's less about whether you're shooting 1080 or 4K. It's more about the size of the sensor, and if you have lenses, and if you have light, and you have good sound. That's where the camera discussion gets in.
What's decent lighting for less than $150?
Decent lighting for less than $150. But also mapping and flip-throughs and close-up products and reviews. All right. Cool. Let me pull something up make sure I so I go to B&H Photo Video for my price checks. Dave, what's the new kit that we bought? Is it this one? Generate LED 7100? Is that the one that I have out on the table? Okay, so I'm going to actually demo this. So this right here has the link. You asked decent lighting for less than $150. Okay. I'm going to show you this light anyway, but there are cheaper lights that you could buy, and I'll get into all the lighting stuff too. We're going to move to the studio, so let's hop up and go there.
For those looking to jump to DSLR, mirrorless, what do we need?
Yeah, I'll show you that. I have a camera in here. Go ahead and jump over to this camera. My mic is hot, so fortunately I've got the crew here helping tonight. This mic's hot, so I'm going to try to not bobble it. Oh, I just bobbled it. Can you guys see me okay? Okay. All right, so let me just bring this around. Let's talk lights. So actually flip over to Chris's camera real quick. So right now what's lighting me up on this green screen is a bunch of really expensive lights by a company called Kino. They make the Kino flow lights. So we have big Kinos over here. These are basically just fluorescent ballasts, okay? And you could put daylight bulbs in them that are rated for like 5600 Kelvin, or you could put regular, fluorescents that kind of match a tungsten light, like a 3200. So you could choose different color temperatures. You could spend $4,000 on these professional lights, or you could go to Home Depot and buy a couple ballasts and wire them for your studio, okay? That's one thing. This is the one I want to show you now, though. Let's cut over to the table for a second, Dave. So this is a Genere LED 7100T. So cut over to the screen cap, Dave. Cut over to the screen cap so they could see the B&H listing. So the light that I'm going to demo right now is this light on B&H. They're listing it for $189. Let me show you in the studio what this thing can do. It's kind of funny. This feels like Home Shopping Network. I should get money from B&H. All right, so here's a little LED light. It has this magnetic diffuser, okay? So you could take that off and have full blast, or you could just boop, pop it on to soften the light. A diffusion is a softening of the light. It takes 2 batteries that come in the kit. Never gonna give you up. Okay, now the reason why I like these lights is, number one, they have a dimmer, okay? So Chris, go ahead and zoom in there and focus. Boop, 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 boop. Little more focus, buddy. Little more, little soft. There we go. That's a dimmer, right? So I can dim it on and off, but it also has this. This is color temperature. So you could dial it in for either warm light, right? So that's kind of a yellow light. See how that's kind of yellowish? Or I could cool it down. Did you see that change real quick? I'll do it again. That's kind of the warmer spectrum. That's 3200 Kelvin. Or I could bring it over more to a cooler, like a daylight, to 5600, okay? So what does that do? It's got some decent throw. So if you're doing your vlogs, you're here going on a close-up on me. Closer, closer. Hey, how's it going? I'm Bill. This is a ridiculous amount of light. But I can actually step out of the light. I'm going to do this. Chris, you see if you can follow me. Okay. I'm going to go over here into the deep, dark depths of the studio where there's no light aiming at me. So can you see me right now? Barely? Okay, so there I go, right? So this is it's an arm length away. If you mounted this on your computer or whatever you wanted, you'd get this, right? If you bought 2 of them, you'd have even better. But the thing is you don't have to pay $189 for a dimmable light. We have these because we're doing filmmaking and we shoot in different locations. But you might not be doing that. You might be shooting in just one location. So maybe you just go to Home Depot and you buy a bunch of LED strips and you mount them all around you, right? The other thing is, too, don't discount basic ridiculous poor man lighting. So I'll give you an example. You can go to Home Depot and buy a cheap clamp lamp. You know, basically it's like a metal bowl, and you put any light bulb in there, any normal light bulb in there, and it's got a clamp, okay? Buy 2 of those and some nice LED bulbs, and just make sure they have the same color temperature, and clip them to your little workstation, and you're good to go. It's nice, soft lighting, okay? So, Nate, that's for you. That's your forget under $150. You can go to Home Depot and buy 4 of those, put one behind you, one on each side, all that stuff. Let me give you the basic principles of lighting, though, and this is kind of important. The best lighting is 3-point lighting. So a lot of vloggers don't do that. Here, cut back to the center camera. Okay, so a lot of vloggers don't do 3-point lighting, but what is 3-point lighting? Where's my backlight? Did we take my backlight? Yeah, we did. All right, so 3-point lighting is this. You have a key light, and it doesn't matter which side of you, but it's on this side or this side, and that's your brightest light, your main source of light. Then you have a fill light that fills in the shadows, okay? Your backlight should be back behind you at like a 30 to 45 degree angle so that nobody sees it in your shot. If you have 3-point lighting, you're gonna look a lot better on camera, and it won't be flat. It'll have some depth to separate you from the background. And that's the backlight. That's the thing that most people are missing is a backlight. Most vloggers, most online people have a key and a fill, or they just have one big key light, but they don't have a backlight to pop them out from the background.
Is there
Questions?
a cheap way to diffuse those $7 lights?
Yes. Well, let me tell you what not to do. Don't use wax paper, because I was like 12 and I almost burned down the house trying to do that. So the thing about diffusing those lights is that you could buy gels for pretty cheap, diffusion paper. There's a company called Roscoe that makes professional gels. I don't know the price offhand, but they're pretty cheap, okay? There are light kits that we could go look at that probably have diffusion as well. You may have heard about soft boxes. That's another option. The basic idea behind diffusing, though, is softening the light, right? So you can actually achieve that just through distance. By moving the light away from you, it inherently will make it softer. So if your 2 lights are right clamped to your computer, or let's say you're in a really tight space and you can't move them away, the cheapest way to diffuse it is to get some like cheap fabric, and I'm talking about from the scrap bin from a fabric store even, or an old white bed sheet that like somebody's throwing out, or even an old white t-shirt, okay? Stretch it over a frame, staple it to the frame, and mount it or somehow stand it up so that the bulb's you don't want it right up against it, okay, because that's like a fire hazard. But basically you create a frame, a white fabric frame, and you put the light behind it and it'll punch through that fabric and that will soften the light. But you want it pretty sheer. So again, if you have like an old really worn t-shirt or an old bed sheet or an old sheer curtain, or you go to Goodwill and you buy something like that, any of those are fine. But you just don't want it too close to the bulb itself, because if your diffusion fabric is here and your bulb's here, the heat could eventually cause a problem. Now, the best part about LED bulbs is that they don't get as hot as an old-fashioned tungsten bulb. So you're going to avoid that problem by buying the LED bulb. They're a little more expensive, but their lifetime is also longer typically than an old-fashioned bulb. Next question? No questions. All right, we're moving on. So you want to buy a DSLR. All right, so here's the thing with DSLRs, and I'm going to call some people out. Some of our friends use DSLRs, probably because somebody said, buy a DSLR, your videos will look better. The thing is if you don't know how to use the tool that well, it doesn't look better. So this is a DSLR, okay? DSLRs are photo cameras. When people, when the video technology was far enough along, this goes back a few years, when video technology was far enough along where a photo camera could actually start shooting decent HD video, that is when indie filmmakers figured out that I can make movies with my photo camera, right? Now why? Why wouldn't they just use a camcorder? Okay, here's why. With a photo camera, that is basically capable of shooting video. You could select different frame rates, like 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, sometimes 60 frames a second, okay? You could also use lenses, and this is the real reason why indie filmmakers started to use DSLRs, because the glass gave them a look, and that look was the cinematic look, okay? And what we're talking about specifically is a Japanese term called bokeh. It means the blurriness of an image. So it's that cool kind of film look where you're in focus, but the rest of you behind you is out of focus, right? It gives it that cinematic look. And maybe your friends who told you to buy a DSLR said, hey, shoot all your stuff in 24 frames a second and set your focus so that you have bokeh, okay? That's very cool, but here's what I see on a lot of people's videos. I see that their focus, their depth of focus is too shallow. There's too much bokeh. And what happens is like from the tip of their nose to their eyeballs is in focus, but everything else is out of focus. And what happens when they're shooting a video and they're talking to a camera is they move forward slightly or they move back, and just moving a couple inches brings them in and out of focus, okay? Or maybe you're using your DSLR to shoot a demo. You're doing a crafting video, and you have your DSLR set up on the table, and you're doing your crafting here with your cutting mat out, and like 2 inches of your crafting mat is in focus and the rest of it is out of focus. This part here is out of focus and what's beyond it is out of focus. That's a problem. That means your focus is too shallow. So how do we fix that? There's 3 settings that create your image, okay? There's your ISO, which is the setting on the camera that tells you the amount of video gain that the camera needs to use. A lower ISO means the sensor is not adding, you're not adding any video gain. You're not brightening up the image at all artificially. So if you go out in the sun, you're going to set your ISO down to like 100, which is probably the lowest ISO setting for most cameras. The next thing is your aperture and then your shutter speed. Okay? Your aperture is a measurement of how open or closed the opening to let light in through this is going to be. Okay? So if I set my aperture to a really low number, like f2.8, it's actually opening up the iris of the camera more. If I set my aperture to a higher number, like 9, it's closing it down. What does that mean functionally? How much light you let into the sensor versus how much light you don't let into the sensor. Now you might be thinking, I want to let in as much light as possible. The problem is that the more open your aperture is, the more shallow your depth of focus is going to be, okay? And this is where some content creators who are using DSLRs get lost, okay? So they don't have enough light to begin with, so they open their aperture all the way. The problem is now their depth of focus is really limited. So when they're shooting that cool craft, half of the stuff that they're trying to demo is out of focus. I'm not going to call it any names, but you know who you are. All right, so how do you fix that? Another thing that I mentioned you could affect that determines how bright your image is shutter speed. Okay? The higher the number of the shutter speed, the darker it's going to be, the more light the camera needs, because the higher number shutter speed is a fraction of a second for how long the shutter is opening and closing to expose per frame. So if you set your shutter speed to 1/250th, that means 1/250th of a second is how long that shutter is opening. So you need more light because it's only open for a very minute fraction of a second, right? So typically my formula is this, my rule of thumb is this. If you're shooting, and this camera is set for 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames a second, your shutter speed should either be 30 or 60, okay? 30 at the lowest, 60 higher, okay? Then you adjust your aperture. So ISO, shutter speed, aperture. All 3 of those things are interrelated, and you have to play with those settings, and you might have to add in more light to get a good image that's not too shallow, okay? So again, when do you use a shallow depth of focus? Maybe you're shooting a cool music video and you want to have like that cool cinematic look, all right? But for 90% of content creators on YouTube, you don't want too shallow of a depth of focus, because then every time you move in your chair away from or towards your screen, you're coming in and out of focus. Same thing with you crafters, okay? When you're doing your crafter demos, you don't want your aperture to be all the way open. You need it to be closed down like halfway, like maybe 5.6 or 6 or 6.8. Add in more light, set your shutter speed for 30 or 60, and then adjust your ISO so that you have a nice, well-exposed image, but you have a little deeper depth of focus so that we're not losing the focus when you're demonstrating how to do something really cool with pink insulation foam. Wink, wink. Okay, so, yeah, more questions.
From taking 20, if we are shooting inside, should we be using warm or cool lighting?
That depends on whether or not you're near a window. So that goes to the question of white balance. DSLRs, as well as most camcorders, have a white balance setting. Okay? White balance tells a camera what kind of light you're using. Now, if it's on auto, it's just going to be like, ugh. I never trust auto with anything because I'm a video professional. And if you want your videos to be better, take control. That's the number one thing you should learn from this. Take nothing else away. Take control of your video content. And how do you do that? By controlling your lighting, controlling your camera, controlling your sound. So, white balance. If you are shooting in a room where there are no windows, no natural light, you could choose whatever kind of light you want, but be consistent. Don't mix lighting types. In other words, you want daylight if you're going to have a window open, okay? Right now I have daylight bulbs. I'm in a cave. I'm in a studio that's in a basement. There's no sun anywhere around here, but we just happen to have these lights and they happen to have daylight bulbs, so I'm lazy. Are daylight bulbs better than, which by the way, that's like usually 5,600 to 6,500 Kelvin. Are daylight bulbs better than a tungsten bulb? No. None of them are inherently better or worse. It all depends on where you're shooting. So if you shoot in a place where you have like a window open, maybe you're shooting in your office and you have a nice big window, take advantage of that. Open it up, but then make sure that the rest of the lights you're using are also color balanced for daylight, okay, so that it matches. And set your camera for daylight for white balance, okay? If you do that, your skin tones are gonna look fine. If you don't do that right, you'll know because either you'll mix it up and you'll either look blue like a Smurf or you'll look kind of yellow and jaundiced. So that's where you get those incorrect white balances, all right? What else do we got? God, that lens is really dirty, Chris. Look at all the dust on that lens. All right, what else?
The DMG info asks what role distance plays in focal depth. For instance, he only has 75 centimeters of space to work with.
Yeah, and you're probably using a DSLR, right? So here's where I'm going to show you some of the glass, okay? So distance, focal length, it still comes back down to that aperture setting. So if you open up your aperture and you move too far away or too close to the camera, it's going to dip in and out of focus, okay? It's that simple with a DSLR. So the lenses that you use are going to have a bigger impact. If you don't have a lot of room, 75 centimeters, that's like nothing.
It's less than 3 feet. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're this close. And if you're a content creator who's using a webcam and it's mounted on your monitor, you're probably the same distance away, right? So if you have a DSLR mounted and you want to be able to get a shot, you need to get a wider lens. So if you find that you set your camera up and you're as far away from it as you could be, and it's still like this close of a shot, and you want more space to work with, you need to get a wider lens. So how do we measure lenses, okay? This right here, I'm gonna actually face these readings towards the camera. So that's a 24. A 24 is a pretty wide lens. Now, whether you're using Canons or Nikons for your DSLRs, doesn't really matter. The lower the number, the wider the lens. Now, you'll notice that this does not have a range, okay? And what I mean by a range is, on this one, next to it, you see 18 to 55, right? That's a zoom. So if there's a range on your lens, that means it's a zoom lens. That means it could go from 18 to 55 millimeters in range. And by the way, this is a standard kit lens. So in other words, when they say what's a kit lens, when you buy a camera sometimes, the companies you buy it from will bundle, they'll throw in like one free lens, and it's usually a crappy lens. This is a crappy kit lens, it's an 18 to 55. It's versatile, you could use it, and like 90% of my students use that's what they use for all their videos. A 24 with no dash, that means it's a prime lens. That means there's no zoom. It means that you set up the shot, you get it in focus, and that's the shot you have. unless you physically move the camera. Okay? This is another prime lens. This is a 50 millimeter. This is about a mid-range prime lens, and the 50 is what we typically see in movies, okay? So when you have a scene where there's like two people talking and they want, they go from one over the shoulder to another over the shoulder, back and forth, the 50 millimeter lens is what keeps those two people roughly the same size. It doesn't compress the image too much. Okay, the last one that I have over here, this big honking Canon, is a 75-300. I don't really think there's any reason why any content creators on YouTube doing gaming vlogs or crafting would need to use a 75-300. This is for like if you need to shoot something really far away. It's a great lens to take on vacation. That's about it. So Gareth, your question is, how do you get more image, I'm assuming, when you're only 75 centimeters away? You got to get a wider lens. That 24 is pretty cheap.
The problem is that the distance with a wider lens is then distortion.
Yes. So that's the inevitable problem. The lower that number, the more distorted it's going to be. So people often look at a GoPro, right, and it looks all blown out on the sides, on the corners. That's because it's effectively a fisheye lens. It's pushing the glass out, and it's distorting that ring. In my opinion, a 24 is a wide enough lens where you get some distortion on the ends, but it doesn't distort it like a fisheye. It's not quite in that fisheye range, okay? So that maybe is a good lens solution for you.
How do you get focus? No, how do you get focus?
Yes. Okay, so here's 3 easy steps. You ready? You zoom in on your subject, you focus, and then you zoom back out, okay? Now you might be saying, well, how the hell do I do that if I'm my own camera operator? Get someone in your household to sit in a chair, wherever you're going to be sitting, go to the camera, zoom in all the way, focus, and then zoom back out. Set the shot, and then you go back into the spot, okay? If you can't do that, tape a piece of paper with text up to a ruler in the seat where you're going to be sitting and set your focus. Again, if you set your aperture a little higher and you add in more light and make adjustments to your ISO and your shutter speed, then you'll have a little deeper depth of focus, so it won't matter if your focus is like within an inch of where you set it. Does that make sense? I don't know if that, you guys are on a delay, but that would be my solution, okay? Zoom in, focus, zoom back out. Some people might be saying, but Bill, you just said that a prime lens, this 24 millimeter, it can't zoom. So how do you focus with a prime lens? On a DSLR, there's 99% of the time there's a magnifier icon, okay? Chris, zoom in on that. So this is a T6i, but on a T3i, T5i, any of those, you have this little focus. See that little magnifying button? So you could click, 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 and you could magnify, digitally zoom in, okay? Don't shoot with that, but you could use it to test your focus. So I'll really fast, because just trying to see if you're in focus from a dumb little screen like this is really hard to do sometimes. So I digi-zoom in to my subject, and I fine-tune that focus, and then I digi-zoom out, and then I know I'm in focus. As long as the camera doesn't change position and you don't move, your focus is set. That's how it's done. Same thing with a camcorder, by the way. It's not just a DSLR. Say you have a camcorder, switch it off of autofocus. Change it to manual focus, zoom in on where you want your zoom to be set, focus, and then zoom back out. Go.
What DSLR do we want to start with? Canon 70D, etc.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. That's a budget question. How much do you want to spend? I mean, I will tell you this. In the T3, T4, T5, T6 range, the T2 through the T5 had basically the same sensor size. The T6i was a step up. I think it went from like 18 to 24. But basically, the T6i is old now, but it's still a great camera. I have a rack of like 15 of them. I think I posted a picture there. If you go with a Canon, then you use Canon lenses, right? So you have EF or EFS that fit on this Canon lens. If you have a Nikon, then you use PL lenses. Now, different photographers are going to tell you different things, right? Everybody has their own preference. I'm going to tell you from my experience. Nikon lenses are more expensive. So if you're an indie filmmaker or you're a content creator on YouTube and you want to start dipping your toe into the DSLR pool, I would go with a Canon because it's a little cheaper. Their lenses are a little more affordable. What's that question? Part B?
It was just suggesting Canon 70D versus others.
Yeah. So the more expensive Canons, what you're paying for are sometimes features, but a lot of times it's sensor, okay? So when you have a cheaper DSLR like a T6i, it has a crop factor. So it means that your 50 millimeter prime lens is not actually true 50 millimeters. It's like what's the crop factor? 1.39 or 1. Basically, this 50 millimeter lens, because it's the sensor crops, is more like a 72 millimeter lens. Okay, but if you take that into account, you'll be fine. Like you just, if you need a wider lens, then you use a wider lens. But I think 90% of the time, especially for the content creators that are doing really close-up stuff with crafting or vlogs, if you have maybe a 24 and then the kit lens, an 18 to 55, you'll be fine.
I'm not sure if this is a question or a statement. You also want a camera that can output a live image via HDMI without screen overlays?
Yes. Well, that's important if you're doing live streaming, but it's not important if you're pre-recording and then editing all your content. So live streaming is another ball of wax, man. And I don't know, I mean, if you're a Twitch content creator or a YouTube live streamer, I don't know, I can't vouch for the effectiveness of a DSLR as a means of doing live stuff. But yeah, you'd want to check and make sure that the functionality of the camera that you're picking is effective for you if you plan on doing live streams. To be honest with you, we do 100 live streams a year, but we have a truck and a studio and $5,000 camcorders to do that. So I will tell you this. A DSLR, remember, is not a film camera and it's not a video camera. It is first and foremost a photo camera. DSLRs are great for shooting short videos or longer videos, but in chunks where you could take a break in between them if you're going to be editing. The problem with the DSLR is it's not made to shoot live video. It's not made to be turned on for a long time, okay? The sensor overheats, pure and simple. It doesn't matter if it's a Nikon or a Canon or a Sony. DSLRs are not meant to be turned on and be running for a long time. The sensor overheats and you could literally blow out and ruin your camera. Okay, so if you're talking about something where you want to be able to do live streaming or you want to be able to shoot continuously for like 4 hours, get a camcorder, get an actual video camera. Even if it's like a $600 camera that shoots like 1080-30, that's going to be a better fit for long video shoots than a DSLR. Okay, the trade-off is with a camcorder, you have a lens that's on there and that's all you have. You don't have the ability to swap lenses typically.
How long would you recommend is like the longest you can run a
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So Shane Hurlbut, for example, is he's a cinematographer. He's a professional cinematographer. He shot the movie Act of Valor with a bunch of DSLRs. His workflow is basically to have like 5 or 6 of these cameras, right? And they're just labeled like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they swap them. So they're constantly swapping. They'll shoot 10 minutes with the A camera, go over to the B camera. They make sure all the settings are the same so everything matches, but he's constantly got a rotation of cameras. So while this one's cooling down, he's got the other camera working. Most of us can't afford that, right? So again, DSLRs are fantastic if you want to take more manual control over the image that you're making. The T6, okay, something to know if you're looking into the cheaper Canons. A T6 versus a T6i, what's the big difference? Here's the big difference. On the side here, you have a microphone input. That's a huge difference, okay? DSLRs are not camcorders. They don't necessarily have great sound. In fact, their built-in sound typically sucks. But I could take a cheap like $20 XLR to 1/8 inch adapter and plug it in to the mic input. And now I've got the ability to plug a real microphone with an XLR into my camera. Okay, so we could talk, maybe segue into sound too really quick while we're here. All right, over on this side of the table I have a bunch of sound crap. Let's talk camera stuff. So this is XLR cable. It's your basic microphone cable, sound cable. 3 pins on one side, 3 holes on the other. That's 90% of professional microphones connect through that, okay? This is an adapter. Again, this is like under $20, might even be like $8, I don't know. But it's got stereo 1/8 inch, so that's those two black lines. I don't know if you could see it. Let me put it in front of my thumb. Yeah, look at that focus. There we go. See those two black lines? That means there's two channels of audio. If there's only one black line, that means your sound is mono. But that's stereo, and then it's a female XLR on that side. So what that allows me to do is plug this in, right? Plug that side into my DSLR, and the other side into a professional microphone, okay? So what kind of microphones do we have? This is a Shure SM58. This is the workhorse of the sound industry. You probably have seen these many times at schools or corporate conferences, anywhere where people are making speeches on stages. Even singers use these, okay? So this is a handheld microphone. If you're gonna go to a convention and do interviews, this is what you use. So you control the mic. No, don't ever let it up. Don't ever let it go. Before you even hit record, tell whoever that you're interviewing that you will hold the mic for them. So it's like, hey, how's it going? I'm here with Cody. Cody, what do you think of Gen Con so far? Oh, Bill, it's really great. I'm so glad that you can interview me here at Gen Con. Great, Cody. Back to you guys. Okay, so that's your SM58. These are like $100. So if you ever plan on going and doing something where you're going to be interviewing people, use this, okay? This is an omnidirectional microphone. So it picks up sound in all directions, kind of like the shape of that globe. Just know that. Okay, here's a shotgun microphone without its windscreen on. It's like a naked thing. Okay, so what is this? This is an Audio-Technica AT875R. So it's a shotgun microphone. What does it mean? That means that it shoots like a shotgun. It picks up stuff in one direction. It's a unidirectional microphone. Now, a lot of you guys say, oh yeah, I got the Rode mic mounted on top of my DSLR. That's totally fine, but just remember that that aims and it picks up wherever you're aiming it. So if I'm shooting something with a DSLR, here's where my sound's picking up. If I swing over here to shoot something cool and this guy's still talking, I'm not hearing him anymore. Now, maybe that doesn't make a difference to you, but it's something important to remember. This is a cheap version of the Rode mic. It's made by Polson. It is a VM101. It's a DSLR mic. Look at that. Isn't that cute? So it's got a little windsock there, little nub, and it's got a cold shoe so you can mount it right on top of the slot. Let's go down here, Chris. I could just mount it right on top of that cold shoe mount, lock it down. And it takes little baby batteries, right? That's double A? No, triple A battery, right? Very easy to replace. I like devices that take normal batteries, guys, because if it has its own special battery and it runs out of charge, you're just screwed. But if you just keep a rack of triple A's, you're fine. Okay, I'm going to plug this into the mic input. Okay, and the last step is I turn it on, and it's got a little indicator. It's got a little green light on the back, so now it's on. So now I have my Rode mic for a lot cheaper. But is it as good as a Rode mic, Bill? Yes. You know why? Because a Rode mic isn't that great. Rode mics to me are kind of like PBR if you're in America and you drink beer. There's nothing great about PBR. It's just a cheap beer, so people started buying it, and now it's expensive, which is stupid. This is a cheap mic, and it's not going to be any different than a Rode mic from 3 to 5 feet away, which is all any of you are using it for. So I hope I just saved you some money. What's next?
Cody said he has a Vixia $300 camcorder that doesn't have a cold shoe mount. I have to have a big bulky tripod V-mount to mount the MKE 600, but I want to shoot at Gen Con plus be able to shoot in large chunks of time.
Use that. If your camcorder has an adapter for a microphone in, like this little baby, then get yourself the Shure SM58 because your sound quality is going to be a lot better. I don't necessarily, and plus, to be honest with you, a camcorder might have a better built-in microphone than a DSLR. Because camcorders are made to be used by consumers and to pick up sound, they're going to pick up it's basically automatic gain. So that means that it's picking up whatever the loudest sound is, right? So if I'm doing an interview and some guy like walks by and they're like, "You suck," it's going to pick up the "you suck." and drown out everything else. So I would recommend taking control of your sound. And if you're doing something at Gen Con, get the handheld mic. Rather than trying to mount something on a camcorder, I would see if your camcorder has a little adapter mic input, test it out. Even if you have to order something from B&H, test it out, and if it doesn't work, just return it and pay the shipping fee.
You also want to be careful the weight you put on the socket of the SLR. I've seen many ports break on the camera, costly and difficult to fix.
That's right. Who said that?
The DMG info.
The DMG. He's a smart man. They make him smart over there.
720 says, I have an SM58 beta. Man, I guess I just hated the idea of running around with a cable all day.
Yeah, I know. That sucks. Well, you can go wireless, but that's a lot more expensive, champ. So to address the point of this, yeah, I don't really like things hanging off of my cameras either. So you could do one of two things. You could either flip it up here, throw a little piece of gaff tape on it, and then that reduces the weight. Or if you don't like tape on your camera, maybe use a little Velcro strap to strap it up there. Like in the slots where the neck strap goes, you could actually Velcro that to the neck strap so that you're not pulling down. Gravity's not pulling down on that pin. That's like a little hack that you could do with pretty much any camera. Okay, last microphone. This is a lavalier. Now this one's a little beat up because we've had it for a long time. Sony ECM44B. It's like a $100 microphone. And it's fantastic. This is used by professionals in the industry. So that's the actual microphone. That little tiny baby nub, you clip that onto your clothes just like I'm wearing up here. Then you have a slot for a AA battery. AA battery, again, I like things with normal batteries. And then you're good to go. That generates the power that you need to generate a signal to go to your camera, and then you have a lavalier microphone. Why are lavaliers good? Because they give you hands-free capabilities. Now, can I conduct an interview with a lavalier? No. So I have to have a lavalier on me, and I have to have a lavalier on whoever I'm interviewing. That's not really practical if you're at Gen Con, right? That's where we go back to this. So, and by the way, I understand not wanting to have a butt ton of cable. So you could buy short XLR cables, like a 10-footer, and by the time it's plugged in, hanging down, and it goes over the person next to you, it's not that bad of a hassle per se. So, yes. What other questions do we have, Brian? Where are we at?
We are caught up on questions.
We're caught up on questions. I'm killing it.
How do you wrap that cable?
How do you wrap that cable? You know what? While we're here, I'll show you a little bit of cable class. Cable maintenance. So I'm a big believer in taking care of your equipment. And to that tune, if you take care of your equipment will take care of you. And here's what I mean by that. Cable wrapping 101. So here's an XLR cable, right? Now, I've been in rock bands, and some of you may have been in rock bands as well, and this is what the cables look like when my guitarist would be done at the end of the night, that big jumble of crap. And that doesn't look good, and it certainly doesn't help out the longevity of that cable. So what we want to do is step one, walk it out. Gently just walk the cable out. So I'm just going to basically lay it out so that, and try not to drop the heads on the ground like I just did. It's kind of hard to do this while I'm wired up. So yeah, take care of your equipment and it'll take care of you. Okay, so we see that we have a couple knots. I'm going to make a comment about knots when it comes to cables, and this could be, you know what, you might never use an XLR cable and you might be like, Bill, this is not useful information. Not true. Every one of you has an extension cord at home, right? And I'm sure that at some point in your life, your dad probably taught you to wrap a cable like this, or like wrap it around like this to keep it organized. That's bad. It's bad for your audio cable because what it's doing is forcing the cable to go around you. It's forcing it. Inside of this cable are little baby copper wires. And when you force them back and forth, they're going to eventually snap and break. And then you'll be like, why the hell won't this crappy cable work? And it'll be your fault. All right, so how do we do this technique? Let's go to that camera. It's better. Okay, over, under. That's what this technique is called. Okay, so I'm going to turn sideways. My one hand is like a lasso. It's just holding things down. Chris, can you get an angle from here? Okay, so this handle is just holding it, right? I'm going to take 2 little baby fingers and come down about a foot, maybe 16 inches, and I'm going to lift and twist. See how I'm making this dance? Brian, let me know when we have any questions. I'm just making this dance right here, just 2 fingers, no force. It's not like I'm like, oh, get up there, cable. So I'm just going to lift and twist and make the first loop. That's my over loop, okay? Now my next loop, I'm going to go down the same distance, and then I'm going to twist and lift under. So I'll show you this from the side. Twist and lift under, and I'm going to lift that up to these fingers, okay? Now over, now under. And what I want is my loops, my loop length to be the same, okay? Because it doesn't make any sense if like one loop's down there and one loop's up there, right? That looks janky. So over and under. So over, under, over. And it takes practice like everything else. Under. But once you get it and you take care of your cables like this, and by the way, I do this with my extension cord at home, my like orange extension cord that I use for house projects. And I've had that extension cord for like 10 years and it still works perfectly. So even if you never get into audio cable, you just learned a useful skill. Over, under. See? All my loops are the right length, and if I take care of my cable, it'll work. The other advantage of over, under is this. Brian, you ready for a miracle? You ready?
Yeah.
Ready? If you over, undered in the right direction, you could hand off one end to someone. I'm going to hand this off to Brian. He's off camera. He's stepping in now. And he could just walk, wow, and it will not make a knot. See? Trena. That's the benefit of over, under.
Taking 20 wants to know if you have any suggestions on staging, creating a set, lighting backgrounds, dark backgrounds,
Yes.
etc. And DMG info added sound paneling.
Oh, soundproofing. Yeah, the poor man's sound box. Let me get to that. I love that. I totally forgot about it. So, okay, staging a set. I'll tell you this. Declutter everything. So if you're like, I shoot my YouTube videos and my vlogs in my office, just be very conscious of what's around you because it's shocking how much people catch stuff. Like, if you have like an empty pop can and like a bowl of ramen in the background, like it's distracting. You want people to focus on you, right? So make sure you're well lit. Make sure that whatever is in the background of your shot is relevant to your content. And a lot of you guys do this already, right? You have like your gaming books or your terrain or your minis, that kind of stuff. I would just say avoid having it look too cluttered, okay? Unless like that's the look you're going for. You're like, hello, we're in the workshop today, right? And like, who am I thinking of? Like Mel the terrain tutor. Like his is a real shop. Like it's a mess, okay? Because he's doing stuff all the time. If that's your look, cool. But if not, like try to have it looking clean, right? Avoid having any personal stuff. Like I try to avoid having like family pictures in the background. Just look at your own shots for a second and figure out what's in there, okay? Now, could you do more dramatic stuff? Of course. I mean, you could go buy pink foam. Oh, look. Did you just key the background? Okay, sorry. You could have more dramatic stuff. You could go buy pink foam and carve like a dungeon wall and put that in the background and uplight it and, you know, like Critical Role. It depends on how much money you want to spend. Gareth asked about sound. So Brian, can you see that like Rubbermaid bin up there? Can you bring that down? This will be cool. So I'm not the person who invented this. This is just a poor man's sound box. But if you're doing voiceovers, here's how quick I was able to make this, right? Step one, grab a bunch of crappy foam. It could be from shipping containers or whatever, or you could go to like Home Depot and buy like, you know, any kind of material. Step two, find a container. It could be cardboard or plastic, doesn't really matter, right? So all I'm going to do is throw this in here, right? Actually, let me throw this big honky piece in there first. Okay, so I'm just lining the inside. I'm not even taping this in, right? Like this is just really fast crap. There are a bunch of videos online that show how to do this. Some of them involve going to IKEA and buying, or like Target even, and buying like a little fabric box, like the kind of thing you'd put like your kids' toys in. So you could do that too, whatever. But I just want you to see that in seconds I put together this foam container. Now you might be like, well, Bill, what good is that? It's not good if you're going to shoot a vlog and like you want to be seen on camera, okay? But what it's good for is voiceovers, right? So I could take a standard microphone like an SM58, put it in here, put my phone in there so I have my script, and read the voiceover. And this much sound dampening is like an enormous difference, okay? Rule of thumb though, anytime you're doing sound, like let's say it's for a voiceover, make one of these. You could do it for like 20 bucks. If you can't do that, let's say you're just shooting your normal vlog and you don't want your face to be in here, how do you do sound dampening? You could actually just build your own sound panels, okay? So obviously if I'm shooting a vlog, I don't want my vlog to be like, hey, hello, I'm Bill, welcome to my vlog.
Your
So,
audience is commenting that Dave is trolling you with the green screen.
yeah, I know, yeah. So how do you build those sound panels? Again, go to your big box supply store, find some foam, staple the foam to a wooden frame. If you're not handy enough to make a wooden frame, go buy pink foam, a sheet of pink foam, cut it to be the size that you want, put some of this cheap foam there, and then rig it up. I mean, you could literally buy anything that can be a stand, okay? And rig that up as close as you can get without obscuring your light for your set. But the closer it is to you on the sides and in back and on the top, the more sound dampening you'll get, okay? I mean, in a perfect world, we'd all be able to afford like a soundproofed studio where we do our stuff. Well, I don't even have that. And I teach at a school with a studio, a production truck, a control room, and a massive lab, and dozens of cameras. I have $500,000 worth of equipment at my disposal, and we don't even have a sound booth. But you could build your own for pretty cheap, especially if you're a vlogger or a content creator and you're working in a small space anyway. But I know a lot of you guys, like Gareth, you might do your intro in your space, but then when you're demoing the craft, you have a voiceover, okay? You could do that voiceover in a cheap $20 sound foam box, and it'll make a big difference. It'll reduce that air noise that you have. So again, that's a cheap solution and an easy way to go.
Taking 20 wants to know what's the process that you go through when you shoot a video. Do you process through audition first and then jump into VP?
The process. I don't process sound in any programs. I take my sound with the video, I put it into Premiere, and I make the adjustments in Premiere with the audio gain. If for some reason I have like a hiss or there's a hum in the background and I want to eliminate it, there are audio filters in Premiere, audio effects in Premiere that allow you to filter. There's like a de-hummer and a de-esser, I think, de-noiser. And yeah, and you could throw that on there and you can adjust the parameters to find the right sound. So what it does, basically, most of those cut sound that's below a certain level. And you have to fine tune it so that it doesn't cut your voice out, obviously. You want your voice to be heard, but the auxiliary sounds or the distracting sounds to not be there. The number one rule for anything, guys, you may have heard like, oh, we'll just fix it in post. Don't do that. Fixing things in post creates more time and more work for you. So I recommend do it right the first time, right? Get a good camera. Or if you don't have a good camera, give that crappy camera more light to work with, because light is often cheaper than cameras. I mean, even if you're like, but Bill, I don't have any money, then shoot your video in front of a window where you have natural light, okay? That'll make a big difference. Sound, okay? If you don't have sound dampening or you don't have great microphones, make sure everyone and everything in your house is quiet. Just turn it all off if you can. Air conditioning, fans, any equipment that has a hum, short of your own computer. But even if you could avoid shooting near your computer with the fan on, that reduces auxiliary sound. I don't process sound with any external programs. So if that's the question that you're asking, my advice is sign up for the Adobe Creative Cloud and learn how to use it. There are a lot of free videos online. I'd even be willing to host a follow-up session to walk people through the basics. It's really not that hard to learn, and once you learn it, it will be a fantastic tool. Do you guys want to see some post demos? Maybe? Any other questions? Let's go back in the control room and I'll show you an actual video that I shot and edited today in less than 2 hours with Brian from Initiative Coffee. So I'm going to take this mic off and we're going to go back in the control room. Follow me. I'm going to leave the big chair here and I'm going to get a little chair because we're going to be shooting over here. Moving this mic, Dave. Are we still on? Are we still live? Yep. Everybody still here?
Yep.
Okay, this is my workspace. Am I live on Chris's camera?
Nope.
Okay, don't go to Chris's camera yet. Sorry, I have to hold down my microphone. My very expensive microphone. My Rode microphone. You guys are like, but Bill, you just said that Rode sucks. All right, so Chris, you on me now? Okay, hey, welcome back, guys. I hope you can hear me. So this is my workstation in the control room. Now, never mind the 4K monitor or the $10,000 Mac Pro that's sitting behind it. That's about this big and looks like R2-D2 and Darth Vader had a baby. But this is Adobe Premiere, and this is a video that Brian and I just shot today. It's a promo for an event, and he's one of the sponsors. His company, Initiative Coffee Company, is a sponsor. So Brian typed up a script. I loaded it in the teleprompter. We shot it in the studio. We took a couple takes, a medium shot and a close-up, and then I went back and forth and intercut between those to kind of make it flow better. Threw an opening on it and closing on it. And the whole video's about a minute. And I use some royalty-free YouTube music, courtesy of Kevin MacLeod. So up here, Chris, can you see? Up here, we'll show the video first, and then we'll talk about it.
Hey neighbors, the handyman here with Initiative Coffee Company. To celebrate Pride Month, Chimera's Comics is working with local businesses and LGBT talent to create an event dedicated to the colorful and diverse nightlife of LaGrange. On Saturday, June 24th, they'll be hosting writers, artists, and crafters from the LGBT community, as well as an in-store gallery and silent auction benefiting the Trevor Project, a 24-hour suicide hotline specifically aiding LGBT youth. Initiative Coffee Company is happy to be donating a 1-month subscription to our Thieves Guild Coffee Heist program, a ship-to-you choice blend of fantastic coffee paired with a new deluxe tabletop game perfect for your gaming marathons and RPG nights. Hope to see you there.
Done. So, what's my workflow? I have a plan. There are 3 phases with everything that is made: pre-production, production, and post-production. This is for the film industry, for television, and it should be for you. If you don't already do it, you probably do. But the pre-production is you plan, okay? Whether that's just some scribbled down notes or a more detailed outline, that's up to you. The more you plan, the better your video will be, I promise. Then we have production. That's when we go and shoot. So our pre-production workflow was this. Brian typed up a script. I knew what we were going to shoot. We had some ideas about the text. And then we went to production, okay? Production was Brian in front of the green screen. We shot the whole thing twice. One from a medium shot entirely through the script. Then we had him do the same script again, same pace from the close-up, right? When that was done, I made the Premiere project. I imported the clips from the studio. I imported the music that I wanted to use. I imported the graphics and then I started putting it together. Go back to here for a second, Chris. So this is the image with the chroma key on it and the background. Okay, so I'll isolate that. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. That is the actual image of Brian, right? There's Brian in front of the green screen. This is the image keyed, okay, on the right. So this is how easy this was. I double click the image once it's on the sequence. I go up to effect controls and I put a filter on it called ultra key. There's my ultra key. I go to the eyedropper, I click the eyedropper, I click a chunk of green right next to Brian. Okay? So I'm actually going to I'm going to show you that. So here's Brian with the green. I go down to my effects. I type ultra. There's my ultra key effect. I drag that onto Brian's clip. It pops up here in the effect controls. I click on the eyedropper. I click next to Brian's face so I get the closest green to his face, because that's ultimately what people look at. I did make a few adjustments, so I switched from composite to alpha channel. And the reason why I did that was I wanted to make sure that Brian was keyed out completely and that the background had nothing else on it before I composited him. I can make adjustments here to highlights, shadows, tolerance, pedestal. I can even do some matte cleanup if I want to soften it a little bit. I can soften the edges just a tiny bit to make it softer. I go back to my composite and I can look at how it looks. Okay. Now, what is this background? That background is an image. And what I did was I added a blur effect to it, because realistically, if I didn't have the blur effect, this is what it would look like. It kind of looks like Brian's right there. Like, that's a very deep depth of focus. I wanted this to look a little more cinematic, so I gave it some fake depth of focus by creating some bokeh. In other words, I blurred the background slightly. Okay? That was a really easy effect to make it believable. When I punched in on the close-up of Brian in the studio, I also have to punch in on my background. So I zoomed into the background, and I increased the blurriness a little bit. That simulates what would happen with a lens if you actually had more bokeh and you were shooting a close-up. Okay? So that's the difference between the medium shot and the close-up. Okay, a little bit about sound on this. The recording of the sound, I'm going to mute it. Okay, because if you missed the beginning, this is the most important part. There's Brian talking. I'm going to actually mute the music, so it's just Brian talking right now. You'll notice on the VU meter, that the range is -6 to -12. It's in that little sweet spot. That's where your primary dialogue, primary voiceover audio should be, -6 to -12. And actually, that's a little hot. I see it's going over -6 occasionally. Okay. So if you don't have a VU meter on your editing system, it would help to have it, because you can't trust your ears. Bottom line is, sound is a science. It's very mathematical. So your primary audio should be -6 to -12. Your sound effects should be underneath that at -18 to -24. And if you have a music bed, which I do, and I'm going to show you that, if we zoom in here and I bring that audio back up, you'll notice that before Brian starts talking, when it's just this title screen, there's music playing. And that music is peaking at like -12, but it's in the -12 to -18 range. That's totally fine for your intro music, okay? Here's my concern. When I'm listening to Cody's video, Cody, I'm only calling you out because I love you. When I'm listening to Cody's video and it cuts to the Cody opening sequence, this is what it's like. Boom, it goes up into the orange and the red. Now, how do I know that? I don't know it for sure because I don't have a VU meter like clocking Cody's stuff. But it sounds a lot hotter than his dialogue. So to me, your opening music needs to be balanced. It should be slightly lower than your dialogue, right? So it could come up to -12 on the VU meter, but you don't want it going up much higher than that. When it switches here, and I'm going to zoom in, when it switches here to the music bed, in other words, where Brian starts talking, I still want the music here, but I want it lower. So what did I make that? I'm going to double click that, or right click, audio gain, and I could see that I brought it down 21 dB. I set it to -21 dB. So that's significantly lower, right? And what that does, I'll mute Brian's track. Okay, I'll mute Brian's track. And now I could see that on the VU meter, the music is down here by like minus 24 to minus 27. That's about right. So what you end up with a final mix is Brian is in that minus 6 to minus 12 range up here. The music bed is down here. It's below him. They call it a music bed for a reason because everything else sits on top of it. So in the final mix,
Talent to create an event dedicated to the colorful
it sounds good
diverse night
and it
out.
looks good on the VU
On
meter.
Saturday, June 24th, they'll be hosting
Brian, any questions?
Have you color matched the video yet?
This particular video.
It says, have you color matched it yet? I assume it's talking about this video.
Okay. I didn't color match it because I'm using the same camera. This was shot with the same camera. I had him run through the script twice. If I were using two different cameras, it would be very important for both of those cameras settings to match. That includes white balance, ISO, aperture, shutter speed. Anything related to the image has to be matched. You have to have two cameras matched the same way. Now, if you guys are talking about your own videos and maybe you have a webcam and a camcorder, or you have a DSLR and a camcorder, then you do have some work to do, but you should still, in principle, try to color match in production before you rely on fixing it in post. Always do everything that you can in production so that you have less work to do in post. The reason why I could turn videos around so fast is because I do it right in production the first time. Now, color correction is easy. If you want to do color correction, again, in Premiere, there are a ton of filters for that, okay? So I could go to video effects and I could go to color correction and I have a whole suite of things to do. If I'm lazy, I could just throw fast color corrector on something and I can mess with my colors there. So I double click it, I bring it up in effects control, and I have a whole suite of color correction things to do. This is just a fast color correction if I want to correct like maybe one thing. If I want to go full out, I would probably do three-way color corrector. Okay, so I drop that on there. Now I've got color correction for my shadows, my midtones, and my highlights. And depending on what you need to do or what you want to do, you can adjust things. So let's say that I want to add a little more warmth to Brian. I might bring this up in the midtones for his flesh tones. Now that's too much. Now he's like red. Chris is better at color correction than I am. I'm going to go to the... There we go. There we go, yeah. If you want to pay Chris $50, he'll teach you. All right, so there I just warmed up Brian. So here, I'll turn it on and off and we can see the difference. That's without. It's a very cool image right there. If I want to warm him up, boom, it looks like he just got back from a trip. Actually, that looks pretty damn good. I might just leave that on there. Now, that's on one clip. Well, Bill, what if you want it to be that way on all the clips? I got two options. I could either click on three-way color corrector, copy it, click on the next clip, and paste it. Or I could do what's called an adjustment layer, which is I right-click in here, new item, adjustment layer. Yes, yes, yes. I throw the adjustment layer above all my stuff and I drag it out there. And now whatever's underneath the adjustment layer will receive that effect. Okay? So if you're doing one fix on a bunch of clips, it's faster to do one effect over the adjustment layer. Question?
Follow up to the color matching question, as in between the foreground layer and the background layer.
Foreground. Oh, on this specific clip with Brian? Yeah, you know what? If I wanted... So here's my feeling. So Brian looks pretty warm in this picture. I kind of like the look of it. So if I throw that effect on, it looks that way, right? But here's the close-up without. Now, which one looks like he's outside? This cooler one or the warmer one? What do you think, Chris? The warmer one looks like he's outside. So if we like that, then I'll throw that effect on all of them. Okay? So now it looks kind of more like he's outside. The funny thing is that we used we used daylight bulbs when we shot this. But you know, this is a quick fix, right? But it does look a little more like appropriate for the background that he's in. He's in a little medieval village. So I guess maybe that looks a little more appropriate. I'm not sure if that answers the question or if they have a follow-up, but you could do the same effect. You could color match with the background using the same effect. It's you know, just adjusting your levels.
It says it looks better with the warmth.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm glad that we had that opportunity to fix it. So, because I haven't exported it yet. But if you guys like it, then we'll leave it that way.
You can also mask it if you don't want to change the background.
That's right. That's true. If we don't want to change the background, we could put an adjustment layer over it, over that, and not over the background by masking out the background. All right. What else do we got?
We're caught up on questions.
Okay, caught up on questions. How are we doing on time?
It's 9:40.
9:40. Well, it's been fun. I'm going to give it a few more minutes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need to show you in this crash course in production and post-production. I guess before we wrap it up, since this video is done, I'll run through a real export. So I have not exported this video. There are two ways that I can do that. I could export it straight from Premiere, and that's fine. The computer will use up the processing power that it can use up and the RAM devoted to Premiere, and you can change those settings, and it'll do it as fast as it can. Or if I have multiple projects and I want to still be able to use Premiere and I have Adobe Media Encoder. Dave, have you used Media Encoder with Cloud?
Yeah.
So this is CS6, but the Adobe Creative Cloud is functionally the same thing. The other way to do it would be to send this to export it through Adobe Media Encoder. And what that'll do is it'll pass it off to Media Encoder. Media Encoder will rock out on exporting it while I could work on other things on Premiere. So if you're trying to hustle through a whole bunch of work, throw this out to Encoder and then keep working on your stuff in Premiere, okay? But I'm not doing that, so I'll show you both. Here's my sequence down here. I'm going to label it, right? So this is promo, initiative, coffee, Chimera, Gala. That's a really long name, whatever. All right, so now I know what it is, so it's not just sequence one. Before I export it, I'm going to save it just because I'm paranoid. If you grew up editing like I did and you started with computer, digital, nonlinear editing systems back in 1997, you would say a prayer at this point to the rendering gods. Please don't crash, please don't crash, please don't crash. But this is pretty reliable. It doesn't crash. Wouldn't that be funny if it crashed right now?
The info says dip the shadows a little.
Yeah. I'm going to just export this. If I really cared this much about this video, I would probably do what you're suggesting, Gareth.
Sorry, Brian.
But sorry, Brian, you're not paying me for this video. It's a nonprofit fundraiser, so we're just going to get it done because I have like 80 more videos to edit. You know that expression about the cobbler's kids always have the worst shoes? That's my life with video, guys, because I do this for a living, day in, day out, every day. I don't just teach it. We have a full service cable station. We produce over 200 programs a year. So unfortunately, I don't have the time to make my own YouTube video channels content look amazing. That's why half the crafting videos I shoot are with my Samsung Galaxy phone. But anyway, for Brian's video here, we're gonna go ahead and export it so that we can get her done. Again, always make sure that you're exporting to the right place. So I have all my content on an external media drive, and you should too. Because if you're exporting to your desktop and all of your project files are on your desktop, that's slowing down your processor. So if you have an external media drive or just a second internal drive, if you have some big hog machine, that's better, because then your primary drive can focus on running the applications and the software that it needs to focus on. All right, so I've selected H.264. It's going to be an MP4. I'm going to go through and double check my settings. It's 1920 by 1080. The frame rate that we shot this on, for some stupid reason, was 24 frames a second, so that spells out to be 23976, or if you're in some other part of the world, your camera might shoot 25 frames or 50 frames a second, and you may be in PAL instead of NTSC, but here in the United States of America, we're using that. That's a television thing. Oh, bitrate. Remember how I said bitrate doesn't really matter if your original camera source isn't that great? Well, this camera was. What do we shoot this with, Dave? A Blackmagic 4K studio camera? Pretty good. So I'm going to pump the Jesus out of that up to 10, which isn't even the bitrate that that camera records in. It's much higher. But 10 is good enough for YouTube, my friends. And this 1 minute file is still going to be a meager 76 megs. So I'm going to export it. It should be done lickety split.
One last question from Taking 20.
Yes.
My welcome adventures at the beginning of my video is way distorted with the MKE 600. I turned everything way down, but that one loud section distorts ideas.
Yes. Welcome, adventurers, to another. Cody, I love your intros, but you're right. They're hot. Somehow that enthusiasm translates to volume. So I'm going to give you the same tip that I give my sports announcers, my students who are announcing sports. You have to somehow convey the enthusiasm without pushing it out through your diaphragm. Welcome, adventurers, versus welcome, adventurers. So you literally need to modulate your own levels. That's it. It's a simple. It's not. You don't need to spend any more money on equipment. Just practice doing your enthusiastic thing that you do so well, but lowering the volume. So, welcome, adventurers, to another edition of, or start a pre-roll and do a couple takes of the welcomes, and then, try one that's at your normal volume, try one that's at a reduced volume with the same facial expressions and the welcome hands and all that stuff, and gauge for yourself if it's going to make a difference. But my impression is that it's less about the equipment that you're using and probably more about that initial enthusiasm. You're trying to convey an enthusiastic welcome, which you always do. It's awesome, but just modulate yourself, bring that volume down. So same gesture, same expression on your face, but just bring that volume down. Yeah, anything else? This is taking its sweet time to export.
XLR adapters too. That negative dB. They want.
Yeah, that's true. Some microphones
better.
can dump down, or you can buy a little adapter that brings down like by 6 dB, or so that'll make an adjustment so that your recording isn't as loud. Because if it's distorted when you record it, guys, there's no way to fix that in post. You can lower your levels, but it'll still sound crunchy and distorted. So that's kind of the key. It's better to be a little safer and record at a lower level, or move your mic a little bit further away if you have to, than to be right up in the mic and just be like blah 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 blah, right? Speaking of which, you could see this real quick. This is the fancy mic that's going to go in our sound booth this summer that we build or buy. I'm not sure which, but it's a really nice mic, and it's crazy expensive, and it's got a windscreen in front of it. It doesn't sound too great unless I'm speaking right into it, but if I'm speaking into it and I modulate my voice, it'll probably sound hella good. Although the room that we're in right now is our control room, and it is constantly noisy. It's not the studio, it's the control room. So there's air ducts here that are blowing air the whole time. That's why it sounds really airy in here. It's not meant to be a place where we record. Okay, that's still exporting. Any other questions, Bri?
Cody says you're lame. DMG Info says YouTube suggests a minimum of 8 target.
Yeah, so the bit rate. So the thing is, if you're shooting something in 1080 with a camera, with like a consumer camcorder, I mean, you could bump it up to 8, but it's not really going to have any impact, because that camcorder is probably not outputting a compressed file that's at that high of a target bit rate. So let me give you an example. If we shot with this, okay, this is a Blackmagic Production 4K camera. I can make this shoot in RAW, or even I could dumb it down to Apple ProRes 422, right? So the bit rate on this camera is like massive. I don't. Do you know, Dave? Is it like 25 or 50 or 32? I mean, it's pretty massive compared to a consumer camcorder. But even then, even if I shot something with this and I was putting it on YouTube, like, I think the most I'd set my target bit rate for would be 10, because it's not, you're not going to see that much of a difference on YouTube, guys. That's the bottom line. Is it's YouTube, so they're putting your videos up there, and they're going to compress them anyway. So I mean, you could set it for whatever you want. It just changes the size of your file. It doesn't really matter. But again, my analogy is like, you can't turn a turd into a diamond. So if you shoot with a crappy camera and it has a low bit rate anyway, jacking the bit rate up on your export and post isn't going to make the crappy camera any better. So that's the easiest, most basic advice I could give you when it comes to bit rate. What else?
We're caught up on questions.
Caught up?
There's that delay.
Yeah, I know there's a little delay. Well, here's the thing, guys. I do this for a living. It took a little bit of time to set up all this stuff. I hope it was beneficial for everybody, and those who couldn't join us live, we'll post this up, and hopefully it'll be a resource. And if you have any more specific questions and I wasn't able to get to them, I think there was one question. I think Larry Hamilton posted a question about VU meter plugins for editing suites that don't have a VU meter. And I researched Sony Vegas, I researched all these different things, and the bottom line is all these things that offer a cheap, stripped down free version of their software typically don't come with a VU meter. But if you buy the Pro version, it comes with a VU meter. So I wish that I got kickbacks from Adobe, but I don't. But the reality is that, I have found, I've used Avid, I've used Final Cut 7, Final Cut 10, and Adobe Premiere. And Premiere is a fantastic suite. It's extremely versatile. It might be a little complex if you're coming from like using Windows Movie Maker or iMovie to this. It's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but there are so many good tutorials out there that you could use, that the tool sets will be handy. Even if right off the bat you're not even using the full functionality, it's worth it. And I think the cost-effective edition of the Creative Cloud, which is basically, it's a la carte. So you could buy just Premiere, or you could buy a bundle with like Premiere and Photoshop and whatever else you need.
Just from my own information, if anybody's a student with a .edu email address,
Yeah.
they can get the whole Creative Cloud for $35 a month.
Right.
So it ends up being
Yeah, if you have the student discount, it's a crazy cheap thing. But even if you're just doing like your own individual thing, I think it's maybe $20 a month for like Premiere and Photoshop, or just Premiere. And at that point, do what you got to do. But a good editing suite with the tools that you need are going to be a big step. Remember the basics. Don't chintz out on lighting. There's so many cheap DIY ways to do lighting, and lighting is so crucial to the quality of your image. You could budget and figure out what you want to do for cameras, but in the end, even a cheap, crappy camera or a phone can look better if you give it enough light. So don't chintz out on lighting. If you can't afford microphones, then at least remember the golden rule that you got to put the camera with the built-in mic close to you so that you get decent sound. And try to turn off or muffle or tell everybody else in your house to keep it down. Those are tips that I can give you that are cheap or cost nothing. Camera lighting and sound are crucial, and editing's a big component if you're going to be producing a lot of content.
Cody says the next forum will be Will Jones on streaming on Twitch. If you could share that and close out.
Okay. The next forum will be Will Jones streaming on Twitch. And what's the topic?
Streaming on Twitch is the topic.
Oh, the next forum will be Will Jones, and the topic will be streaming on Twitch. So make sure you tune in for that one.
And then he looked up the price. Adobe Creative Cloud is $50 a month or $20 a month for the first year if you have a .edu email address.
Okay, so that student discount's pretty crucial. Yeah, they want their money. So, but I think that's for the whole suite. I think that's for all the Adobe programs. So I think you can a la carte it and just get like Premiere for pretty cheap. So look into that if you're looking. But again, I hope all this information's been helpful. If you have questions, hit me up. I do this all the time, and I'm happy to help out if I can. If you have more specific questions related to your specific questions or your specific setup or equipment, I'll do my best. Obviously, I know a lot about a lot of different things, but I don't know everything about everything. So if you're using, equipment that I'm not familiar with, I'll have to look it up and give you the best advice I can give you. But hopefully all these basics have been good. And I think that's it. I think we could peace out. So peace out. Thanks for watching.